Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the Homesteader's Classroom. Today we're actually inside. It's been a little bit rainy for the past couple days, and I recently went and visited my grandmother, and I picked up from her yard. She has a kumquat tree, and I picked up these gorgeous kumquats. And I love to eat kumquats raw. They're actually the only citrus fruit that you can eat rind and all. Um, but I decided that I'd really rather make some marmalade with them. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about um, how to make marmalades, jams, jellies, because yeah, we do want to grow our food and we want to be able to eat food fresh, but sometimes we also need to be able to preserve that food, actually a lot of times, so we can have fresh fruit throughout the year, fresh vegetables throughout the year. You have to know how to preserve as well. So today we're going to be focusing on jams and jellies, and gotta be honest, I do have a little bit of experience making these already. So last year for my wedding, I thought it'd be a good idea if I made homemade jam for my wedding favors. And I didn't just want to make the jam, I also wanted to get all the fruit myself. I don't mean going to the grocery store and buying fruit. I actually went out foraging for fruit, getting fruit from neighbors and family members' trees that they had in their yards. I did go to a strawberry patch. I went out in the woods, collected wild blueberries and blackberries, and yeah, so just it was a year-long process of collecting a whole bunch of different fruit and then turning around and turning it into jam. So I got a lot of jam making experience. So I would like to share that with y'all today and show you that it's not that hard. It sounds like it's scary and it's complicated. It's really not that hard. It's the first thing I learned how to preserve. So I want to walk y'all through the steps on how to do it and show you that you can do it at home too. So starting off, we're going to talk about our fruit selection. I've chosen kumquats. These are fresh. I picked them from my grandmother's yard about a week ago. But you can make jam, marmalade, jelly pretty much out of any fruit. There are some that are a little bit more difficult to do, like bananas, but I have seen recipes for that online. So if you really want to, you can make banana jam. So great. But like again, I emphasize this is fresh fruit. Why do we want fresh fruit? The point of making jam is to preserve the season's harvest so that you can eat it year round. So why would you want, say if you're making strawberry jam, why would you buy strawberries in February and then when they just don't taste good, like you hardly want to eat a fresh strawberry in February, and then to turn around and make jam out of it that you're supposed to enjoy later on? Why would you want bad tasting strawberry jam in the springtime and summertime when you could just wait around for the strawberries to come in season? Two, when they're cheaper, and then you can buy a lot of them at that time and make really good tasting strawberry jam. It just kind of makes sense. So we want our jam, not our jam, we want our fruit to be fresh. But there are some things to know about when it comes to ripeness. You would think, okay, you want the ripest fruit possible, right? Well, yes and no. So for instance, my kumquats here, some of them are perfectly orange all the way around. And yeah, they're great to go. Others of them have just a tinge of green. Just a tinge of green, if you can see it right there from where it was connected at the stem. This one too has even more, just a little bit of green. And if you were to eat that fresh, like pick it off the tree, probably be a little bit sour, maybe not the best for eating. But that's okay. See, what we're looking for when we want our fruit is to try and figure out how much pectin our fruit is going to have in it. The riper a fruit is, the less pectin it has in it. So the earlier stages are going to have the most pectin. Now, what is pectin? Pectin is the most essential part of jam making. There's really only 4 things that you need for jam making. That's the fruit, sugar, pectin, acid, and then I guess if we're going to add a little something else, heat. but that's not actually an ingredient. You do need to add it. But anyways, pectin's the most important. Pectin is something that's found in every single plant out there. It is a component that's found in the cell wall of plants, and it helps with the structure and sturdiness of plants. So when we're looking for it in our fruit, it can mostly be found in the outside skins or rinds and in the seeds. That's where the highest concentrations of them are. That's why when you're making jam, you may have seen in certain recipes to keep the seeds, which this is the one I'm going to do today actually tells me to do that. You keep the seeds, you put them in a cheesecloth bag, and you let it cook in with the fruit so it can get a natural form of pectin. You can, if your fruit doesn't have enough pectin, also buy boxes of pectin at the store, and they're pretty much just, sorry, my cat's going crazy right now. They're pretty much just, a one-time deal, depending on how much that you're making, but most recipes will call for 1 box of pectin. So that's what we've got with our fruit. I've got a mixture of perfectly ripe fruit that's ready, and also a little bit of younger fruit, because younger fruit has more pectin in it. So it's a nice mixture. All right, so we've got our fruit covered. So now that I've told you about my fruit selection, I'm going to start preparing it personally. And to tell you for this recipe, what I'm going to be doing is cutting my kumquats in halves, quarters, and then eighths. And then I want to remove all the seeds from it, but I do want to keep the seeds separately in a container nearby. I plan on linking the recipe, but just know that I've kind of gone off the book for this recipe a little bit, because it tells me to separate the membranes from the rind. And I've made this recipe before. It turns out really good, but I must have misread something or just not been paying attention the first time I made it, and I didn't separate them. And it turned out great. So I think that's just an unnecessary step personally, but make sure that you keep the seeds, which they are little bitty tiny, and put them in a bowl to the side. So this is a bit of a time-consuming recipe, I will admit, but the results are very good. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing here is after cutting it in half, if you see the seed, it's better to just go ahead and remove it. Because when they get cut in half and quarters, they start becoming a little bit harder to separate. So just go ahead, and if you see the seed, see that's an itty bitty piece. If you see the seed, just go ahead and remove it and then continue cutting. At least for my kumquats, I found that each one has somewhere between 4 and 5 seeds. And another thing is, like, this, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's all going to get cooked down pretty well. It's just we want to be able to not have too chunky of bits, but if you like it chunky, then, or maybe if your kumquats are even small, just cut them into fourths instead, whichever one. Don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but kumquats are the only citrus fruit that you can eat, peel and all, and honestly, they're meant to be eaten that way. I've actually seen some videos of where people try to eat kumquats, and they try to take the peel off or eat just the center, and they're like, wow, this is really bad. Well, yeah, it's gonna be bad that way if you eat it. The inside and the outside have different notes. One's a note of sweet, one's a note of sour, and they work just beautifully together. If you try to separate them, it's not a good time though. I think the first one I saw is, if anyone watches Justin Rhodes' video, I remember watching some of his first videos when he went on a tour of America to look at different farms, and they picked up some kumquats from the Asian market because they'd never seen them before. And yeah, they hated them. So when I was just laughing the whole time thinking, that's not how you're supposed to eat them, because they tried to separate them. I forgot to mention this, guys, but make sure that you wash your fruit really well before you start prepping it. I'm sure plenty of you know already, especially if you get it from the grocery store. Uh, Sometimes chemicals get thrown on food in order to preserve it better, and that's just how it is. So make sure that you wash them better. These ones I didn't have to give too hard of a washing to, because like I said, again, they were in my grandmother's yard, and her neighbors don't really use much. Honestly, she doesn't even like her kumquat tree, so she never pays it any attention. She doesn't care if any bugs get to it or anything. But thankfully they didn't, so I got some great fruit from it. Funnily enough, when it comes to kumquats, at least, they are originally from Asia. They got brought over to the United States as more of a ornamental tree, especially for winter, because when everything's dead pretty much, you can turn around and look, and yeah, you'll see a tree with beautiful orange fruit on it. Just for the longest time, everyone here thought that you couldn't eat that fruit. Glad we finally figured that out. Now, some people might wonder why even go through the trouble of making this jam if it takes so much time, and it really does take like a good bit of time to make kumquat marmalade. The reason being is because one, it just tastes really good. It's one of the freshest. No, I would say it is the freshest tasting jam I've had. Like, even I don't know, it has a different taste than orange marmalade. I think it tastes better, honestly. And this was the first jam I made, and both me and my husband, we really like it. It's his favorite. I think it definitely competes for first in my book. But uh, well, I got my grandmother had these kumquats, and I really hate to see food go to waste. The birds and the squirrels weren't eating it, and so I like to turn it into something else. Now, if I had more kumquats, I could try making something else, but the recipe I'm making today only calls for a pound of kumquats. So if I wanted to make any more, I would definitely need a little bit of a team helping me do this part. But I just make this in a small batch, and yeah, maybe that means I don't have as much of it, but I really get to savor the little bit that I do get then. So maybe if you make this jam, don't give it away as much. Honestly, when I made at least 18 different types of jam for my wedding, and this one being my favorite, I stashed away one last container. It only made 3, and I took one to keep for myself just because we liked it so much, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take this. I mean, but come on, I made like 80. I had 80 jars of jam, so minus one, it was fine. Okay, finished. And as you can see, we have a whole bowl full of cut kumquats, and then here's our cup of seeds that we saved. So next thing I'm going to do is take some cheesecloth right here. Cheesecloth is, well, I mean, it's called cheesecloth because it's used in cheese making, but it's just a little cloth that you can form a baggie in, and it keeps stuff in it. I have terrible kitchen scissors. I'm going to try to saw it, I guess. And you don't need a lot, just enough to make sure and that it can hold all your seeds in it. And it comes folded up already. So I just like to, oh, that's not going to tear. I just like to make sure that I have enough of a layer to make sure that the seeds don't fall through the little holes. Because you can see, there's these fine little mesh holes, and the more layers you pile on top of each other, the more it's going to trap from being able to go through it. Alright, and so then we're just going to take our cup and pop those guys in. Make a little baggie. Doesn't have to be pretty. Then I'm going to grab a piece of kitchen twine. Just tie it on up in a little bag. Cute little parcel. Okay, we got our fruit all prepped. Next thing that we need to talk about is actually the pot that you're going to make your jam in. So, jam making's been around for a long time, and if you ask a connoisseur, they'd say that the best pot for making jam would be something like this. It's a copper pot, and it actually has a really wide bottom and high sides in order. This is a pot specifically made for jam making. I actually bought it because I was making 16 different types of jam last year. Why is that known as the best pot? Copper is a really good insulator, and it produces a really even heat. It's got a wider bottom on it so that there's more surface area. It doesn't stick. So really good uses on why to use that. But that is expensive. I actually got mine for cheap because I found it on Etsy, and it was like rusted over, and I cleaned it up myself. So if you're looking for one, good way to save money instead of having to buy a brand new one. But I'm making a very small batch of marmalade today. So I'm just going to be using good old-fashioned non-stick pan that some of the non-stick has come off of, because it's what I have and it's smaller. You can technically use any pot to make jam in. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need a copper pot. Just as long as you are paying attention to your jam and you don't walk away from it so it burns, then you're good. Okay, so we know what we're going to be making our jam in today. Next thing we have to talk about are the other ingredients that go into jam making, which is that we need sugar and we need some acid. Alright, so now that we know what pot we're going to be using for our jam, we need to talk about the other ingredients that are going in, and that's going to be water and sugar. So now water we add to the beginning of the jam mixture, because if you just added sugar into it, it probably burn. It makes it easier. But the reason why these two ingredients together, and I'm going to be putting these in the pot as I go, I put in 2 cups of water, by the way, and I'm going to be putting in about 1 3/4 cup of sugar. So now here's the question: how do we know how much sugar to add to a recipe if we want to make our own jam recipe? If we want to go off the books, we don't want to follow someone else, or we're just experimenting. So usually people will say 2 different things. They'll say that you can do a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to fruit, or it depends on how sweet or bitter the fruit is. The sweeter the fruit, the less sugar you need. The more bitter the fruit, more sugar. So then it would be more like a 2-to-3 ratio of fruit to sugar. Kumquats are, at least these kumquats are pretty sweet. I've tried them in comparison with some other kumquats that were got from another person's yard, and for some reason the ones that were on this tree were pretty sweet, whatever the nutrients were that were going on in it. It had some primo conditions or something, I don't know. But taste your fruit. If it tastes like it's a little bit more bitter or just not quite there, add a little bit more sugar. The only thing though is if your fruit is completely unripe, doesn't matter how much sugar you add to it, you're not going to make that fruit taste better. Your jam is just going to turn out tasting like sugar, pretty much. So another reason why it's important to use ripe fruit. But anyways, what really matters though is, so yeah, we add the sugar to make our jam sweeter, but really why is it that most jam recipes are just sugar, water, fruit, and then pectin in the fruit or added to it later? The role that sugar plays in jam making is actually very interesting. I found a whole article on the science behind jam making. I really like to know these things. I'm going to link it, but so if anyone wants to look at it, they can. But just for a quick explanation, basically the sugar's job is to bond with the water. Now, as this cooks, there's going to be less and less water. But if we didn't have the sugar, then the pectin that's in the fruit would want to, it doesn't want to bond to each other. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the pectin to come out of the cell walls. The cell walls get broken down through the process of cooking, and then you have to get them to bond with each other in order to create the viscosity that comes with jam or jelly. If those pectin molecules don't bond, then you end up with syrup, basically, which is still delicious, but not jam. So the sugar bonds to the water and helps encourage pectin to bond to each other instead of trying to bond with the water like it naturally wants to do. Reason that pectin doesn't want to bond together is because they're both negative, and negative and negative, they don't attract. So we add the sugar in order to bond to the water and make it easier for the pectin to get friendly with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and add my fruit into this pot as well. It looks like it might be a bit stuffed, but that's okay. Again, this is a small recipe. As you're cooking jam, it cooks down a lot. Yes, I just added 2 cups of water, but there's not going to be 2 cups of water in this jam when it's done. Final thing is I'm going to be adding my little parcel that I made with the seeds in it, and we're going to put it in there. Now, I mentioned earlier that you need acid in order to properly make a jam. Why do you need acid? And what's the most usable form of acid? Well, a lot of people like to add lemon juice or lemon rind. I don't need to add any lemon to this recipe because kumquats are a very acidic fruit themselves. The role that acid plays in this whole mixture, though, is that we know that the water and the sugar like to bond to each other, but still, pectin being negative does not want to bond to other pectin. The acid helps coerce it, basically. It helps attach onto pectin to make it more of a positive ion so that they want to join together and create that matrix, that mesh that's going to make that jam consistency. So you definitely need acid in your recipe. If you're working with something that's low on the acid, kind of like strawberries, yeah, you're going to want to add some lemon. Not too much unless you plan on making a strawberry lemonade jam. But play with it if you want to, or if you're uncertain, follow a recipe. So I'm going to turn this on. And now I'm just going to put it on medium heat so I can talk to y'all for a bit. So, yeah, right burner's on. Okay. So if I wanted to, at this point, I could continue and make this jam all the way through going to the canning process. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is get this jam to come to a gentle boil. And once I get it to come to a gentle boil, I'm going to stop. This is very bad French pronunciation, esconfitures, which basically just means it's the jam book. It means the jams. And it is written by Christine Ferber, who is known in France as the jam making fairy because she just makes the best jam in the whole world. Now this, I have made a couple of her recipes, and the interesting thing is, in comparison with her recipes and some of the recipes I've seen online for how to make jam really quick, is that hers take a bit more time, not because they take more of a process or anything, like you have to do anything. It's just that she likes to stick it in the fridge for a couple days, depending on the fruit. She'll stick it in the fridge. Why does she do that? The reason why is because it helps with the foam of jam. If you're new to jam making, then you have no idea what this is. And basically, it's as you're cooking down the fruit, it's going to start to foam and bubble a little bit, and it comes up to the surface. Now, all this is just oxygen that's trying to escape as you're boiling it, and it comes up in this foamy substance. And it's not that it's bad, because again, it's just oxygen in fruit. I mean, if you scooped it off, it would just taste like fruit syrup, basically. It's not that it's a bad thing, but it doesn't make your jam turn out all pretty like you want it to. Most, or not most, but at least when it comes to buying commercial jam, you can pick it up and you can look at it and it glints in the light and it's so beautiful. Making sure to have as little foam as possible in your jam is going to give that gem-like quality to it that so many people want. Now, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have this appearance to your jam. It's just not as pretty. And I can show you what it kind of looks like. This is a batch of jelly that I made from satsuma juice, actually, and I turned it into a pepper jelly, added some chipotle pepper to it. But if you look up at the top, sorry guys, I know it's hard to see this, but I'm going to try turning it a little bit, and it's such a reflective surface, but you can see some of the bubbliness, some of the white streaks, not so much down here, but up at the top especially. There's more streaking that's happening through that makes cloudy appearance and just doesn't turn it as pretty. Again, though, that's just air bubbles that are trapped. That can be a problem when it comes to canning some other things, but not so much in jam because it's such an acidic thing. So it is, though, best to try, and when that foam comes up, and I'm going to show y'all what it looks like when we actually get to that step, to try and skim it off the best that you can. But don't throw it away. Again, it tastes just like fruit and sugar. So if you wanted to, you can make these toast right there, throw it on there. Or I actually saw a really cool idea where you can throw it in a bowl of ice cream. Which again, I didn't realize, I don't know why I never thought of this, but you can put jam on ice cream. That blew my mind when I read that, and I tried it, and it's like, yeah, it's delicious. You want a great fruit tasting ice cream, and you want just get some vanilla ice cream and throw some jam in it and mix it up, and bam, amazing. It actually tastes really good. If you haven't had it before, I'd try it. But so let me show y'all. Okay, guys, so here's my jam pot that I got going right here. You can see the little parcels right there, and if you check out right there, you can see we've got a little bit of bubbling going on right there. So that is the perfect time for me to stop at this process. Turn that burner off. Get that off. Again, because we're just not going to make this guy all the way tonight. I've got my little glass bowl right here, and I'm going to pour my mixture into there. Okay, guys, so I've got my kumquat jam in this bowl right here, and it's got its little parchment top. We're just going to set this in the fridge for tonight, and we'll come back and visit it tomorrow. Okay, and we're back. Good morning, guys. It's actually been about 2 days. I was going to can this jam yesterday, but my work ran over a little bit late and I didn't get home until way later at night than I intended to. So now we're doing it the next morning, which is okay if for some reason you can't get to it immediately. Your fruit's going to be just fine sitting in the fridge. I mean, it's got a whole bunch of sugar in it right now, which sugar helps act as a preservative. So you don't really have to worry about your fruit going bad. I wouldn't leave it in there for more than 2 days or 3 days, but I mean, like you can see there's not any weird coloration going on or anything like that. That just happens to be that's the bag right there, if you're wondering what that is. But yeah, so everything's good to go. It's been sitting, so I have my pan right here. I've traded it out for something with a bit of a wider bottom to help with the processing to make it go a lot faster. So we're gonna get started and pour this sucker in. Now I'm going to turn this on to more of a medium high, only because I have a little bit more experience. When it comes to jam making, I'm also on a bit of a time crunch right now. So as long as I watch this and I don't walk away from it to make sure that it doesn't burn, we're going to be fine. Okay, so this is currently what our jam looks like. As you can see, it's not much different looking, but if you can see as I jiggle the pot, it's very watery right now, and that's fine. When we're making our jam, the goal is basically to have as much of that water evaporate as possible, and then whatever water is left behind is going to bond with the sugar, and it'll make that jam consistency. Now, I've got a couple other things here on the stove I want to point out. I've got my big pot. Now, this is my water bath canner. It's not an actual legitimate water bath canner, it's just a stock pot. And as you can see, I have a trivet in here. When you're doing water bath canning, which is what jam making is, you don't have to have any specific tools. Any pot can work, actually. You just need something that has a large enough bottom that you can fit your jam jars in, and then something keeping it from those jars from touching the pot directly. That can be either a metal rack, or as you saw, I have a little silicone trivet, and that's what I've been using to do all my jam making, and this setup works great so far. Maybe one day I'll get something that's a little bit wider in case I want to do something more, or if you do have those metal, if you do have the metal trays, then that allows you to stack them and go a little bit higher. So I've got my I've got this water heating up, and what you want is you want to have enough water in the pot so that when you put your jars in, that it has at least 1 inch to 2 inches of water. I do a little bit more because I borrow some of this water, and I'll explain that. So we're going to cover that up, help it heat up. And then I have this little frying pan over here with my cup. Now, this little old measuring cup I actually use to scoop the jam into the jars. I've just found that it comes in handy. And the reason I have this frying pan here is because of what we need to do with the lids. So I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. Okay, so the jam's just getting started heating up. The water's just starting in the pot. Now we're going to talk about our jars that we need for canning. So I've got some behind me right here. These are 6-ounce jars. Yeah, they are Ball brand, but there are a couple of other brands that you can use. This is just the one that I had on hand. When you start canning or preserving your food, you're going to end up with a lot of jars. Now, there's some people who swear that you shouldn't use any jar except for Ball or I can't remember what the other one is, but one of those name brand jar companies. And I'm going to point one thing out. It's true that these jars are probably better made and are going to last through multiple uses. But if you are just making a jam to give away as a gift, like what I ended up doing when I had my wedding gifts that I gave away, I just bought a pack of tiny 4-ounce cans from Amazon, and they came in a pack of 40. I have no idea what brand they were, but none of them broke on me. I was using them for single use, putting them through. They're just to look pretty, get the job done, give them out as my gifts. And if some people want to use them as containers afterwards, and that's great. For that single use purpose, yeah, none of them broke on me. There were no chips. I had no problems whatsoever. If you are looking to do just a gift item, you don't have to go with the Ball can or jar because these suckers can get expensive. They can really rack up. So if you're just doing a single use, don't be afraid to look into something that might not be, name brand. That's okay. If you're looking to be using these jars multiple times, which these are for that purpose, then you might want to look into spending a bit more money on some good quality glass because this glass is going to be getting heated up and kept at high temperatures, and then it cools down, and that can be very stressful. If anyone's ever accidentally made the mistake of putting something that was really hot into some cold water, you know what happens. The glass is going to break. But these guys, they hold up pretty well. So if you're doing and interested in doing a lot of canning, invest in some nice jars. But now that we have the jars talked about, I'll talk about the lids, which I just got a new pack of lids and bands. Again, this is Ball brand. You can buy these at Walmart if you're out. But what we need to talk about are these lids right here. So this is the lid that's going to go on top of your can. Now the ring that goes with it is used in the canning process in order to keep that lid on top while it's sealing. But once you have a good seal on it, then technically you don't need the ring, and you can just completely take it off, and you don't really have to even pop it back on until you're ready to open the jar. Once you open it, you break that seal, and then you can use the ring to keep it closed if you're trying to store it in the fridge for a little bit longer. So anyways, these lids, they have, as you can see, this red on the side. Now this is a sealant. And what you want to do is you want to get this hot in order to help it become more moldable to be able to use when you're canning, when the water's boiling. So I showed you that little frying pan I have set off to the side. What I like to do is put my lids in that frying pan. And then once I have my water all boiled and ready to go, I will spoon water into the frying pan with the lids and the rings and the measuring cup and anything that I'm planning on using in the canning process to help get it sterilized and to get those the molding on the lids to be more pliable and make it easier to create that seal. So another important fact when you are canning, now I've done it with these, you want perfectly clean jars to try make sure that you prevent any bacteria. Yes, they're going to be going in a hot water, but still you want to wash them before you get started. If you're going to be preserving something and putting it away for a while, I mean, it makes sense. You want something that's clean, so when you put it away, it doesn't grow mold or even worse, botulism. Now, that is the one big thing that you have to worry about when you're doing your own canning is botulism. It's a bacteria, and basically it grows in canned items if oxygen is present. Now, don't be too worried about it because botulism poisoning doesn't really, from home canners, does not happen that often in the US. As long as you take it step by step and make sure that you follow everything properly, wash everything before you do it, heat it up to sterilization temperature, and then quickly move, you're not going to have any possibility of contamination. But if you do decide to can and you put it away and then you open it up and you notice that it looks like there's something weird on it, use your best judgment. Don't eat anything that looks weird. Even if you made it yourself, even if your grandma made it for you, your mom, your cousin's brother, sister, whoever, if you open a homemade canned item or even a canned item from the grocery store and it looks funky, don't eat it. Just don't eat it. Okay. So, next thing we need to talk about is our canning equipment. And again, it seems like it's fancy, but it's really not. So what I use for jam making is I use this funnel. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in my little pan. And then this right here is a little magnet, and it's going to allow me to pick up my lids so that when I put water on them, really, really hot water that gets that sealant to be a little softer, I can pick it up without contaminating it with my hands or also burning my hands trying to get the lid out. And it'll work for the rings too. And that just pops back down. And then finally we have our grabbers here, which These are, oh, I was holding them upside down. Basically, you use these to pick up jars out of the water. You can see, hold it like that. I think they're better used for heavier jars. I honestly use, for some reason they're not in here, I use just some tongs to get jam jars out because they're really not that heavy at all, especially with, I mean, I don't usually put jam in anything bigger than this. So it's really not that heavy, and I just use the tongs to pull them out. That works. And then we have this, which is our headspace measure. Now, what is headspace? Headspace is going to be the amount of room that you have between the item in the jar. So let's say that we fill our jam up to here and the lid that goes on top. Now, everything that you can is going to need a certain type of headspace. With jam, you need at least 1/4 inch of headspace. So that also helps to contribute with the sealing process. You need just a little bit of space to be able to create that vacuum in between your jam and the top. If you don't have any space at all, then no vacuum can form and you're not going to be able to can it. Also, the amount of headspace that you have between you helps to be so that when you're heating your item up or the jam up, that if it rocks a little bit, it's not going to get on your lid and interfere with that seal, because you need it to be perfectly clean on the surface that you put that lid on. If you don't have a perfectly clean surface, if you have some jam on it, or wipe it off, because if you don't have a clean surface, if you don't have a flat surface, it can't create that seal. And you need that seal in order to do this properly. I know it sounds hard, but I promise you it's not. Okay, so we basically talked about all the components. I had to talk about these things before we really jumped into it because you got to move quickly. When it comes to processing, you got to move quickly, and I'm not going to be able to explain everything thoroughly in that amount of time. So we're going to move on. I'm going to put these jars into my pot of water that's starting to boil. I usually like to put them in from the very beginning, but it really has only been on for a little while, so it should still be fine. It's not going to put on too much stress. Okay, guys, so I found the tongs. These were the ones that I was talking about. Really come in handy, at least for me to be able to move quickly when it comes to at least jam making. But so let's take a look at these jars real quick. As you can see, the water's starting to heat up. They went in there fine, but take a look at the jars. None of them are touching. That's what you want. You need to have a little bit of space between each jar. In this heating process, it's okay, but when you have your jam in the jars and you're actually processing it, then they cannot touch. You need to have boiling water around every surface in order to form that seal properly. So don't overstuff. It's okay if you need to work in batches. It really doesn't take long once you get things moving. The water's just starting to get hot. You need your water to be at least 180 degrees. Okay. That's really not, doesn't take as long as you might think it is. I have a little thermometer that I use to check it. If not, then a rolling boil. If your pot has a rolling boil, you've definitely reached 180. You need these jars to come up to 180 degrees, so in order for them to be fully sterilized. Okay. Now let's take a look at our jam right here. Okay, so really not much going on right now. It's just starting. It's going to take a little while to boil off this water, but that's okay. It's a bit of a patient thing, but we'll check on it from time to time. Some recipes say it only takes 25 minutes. If you can make jam in 25 minutes, you are far better than me. I'm very impressed by that. Also, my oven completely sucks, but that's okay. And then as you can see, I've got everything right there. You can see that there's the rings, the lids, and the item, my funnel, which you put these in the jar and then scoop the mixture into the funnel. And that helps to get your it in evenly and clean without getting stuff on the sides. Okay, so again, all we're going to need is time. The last step I think is a good idea to do is to take a plate. Now, just a simple plate and stick it in the freezer. Why? When your jam is ready, it needs to be a certain consistency. And that needs to reach 225 degrees Fahrenheit, which again, you can use your thermometer. I have a candy thermometer right here. This is what it looks like. And yes, I do use it to monitor. And, well, it just fell in the pot. But another method of checking that you have a jam consistency is you put this plate here, or some people like to use spoons, but you put a plate into the freezer. It gets really cold. When you're ready to test your jam, you doll up just a little bit onto the plate, throw it back in the freezer, wait a couple minutes, and then you take it out. And you're looking for a ripple test. We'll do that later, but that's a good way to check consistency if you do not have a candy thermometer like I do, which now I need to wash it. So I'm going to check back on y'all when stuff gets moving. Okay, guys, we're checking back in on our jam here. As you can see, it's starting to boil quite a lot, but you see how watery of a boil that is and all the steam? That's a lot of air that is escaping because the water is boiling off. So that's what we want. I did turn the heat down a little bit. I turned it high to get it started, turned it on medium now, because with the kumquat jam that we're making, we have these peels, and yes, they've been soaking in the sugar and the juices for a couple days, but we still need these peels to soften in order to have a yummy marmalade. So I turned it down to medium. This one does take a little bit longer because you do need to soften those peels, but I wanted to show you something. So I've got my thermometer right here. Now you can see it says that it's at 200. Now, if you are using a thermometer with jam making, and you remember I told you 225 is the temperature that you need for the jam consistency. And you see that that thermometer says 200, and you're thinking, wow, okay, it's going to be very close. No. It takes a long time for your jam to get up from 200 to 225 because it's not going to really get any hotter until this water gets boiled out. Until it becomes more of a thick, jam-like consistency. You can see how much water's in there. See, it's going to stay at around 200 until it gets thicker. These bubbles are really light. They're producing a lot of steam. The bubbles will change. There'll be more of these goopy bubbles instead that are more likely to be flinging jam around, so you actually have to watch for it. But it's not until your jam or marmalade or jelly gets a lot thicker that you're going to have it at the right consistency, that it's going to finally get up to 225. So honestly, we're just going to let this sit the way that it is for a while and let it do its thing. Alright guys, so my water has actually reached a little over 180, and I just wanted to show you what that looks like. See, it's not even quite a rolling boil. You don't, in order to get them your jar sterilized, you don't have to have a rolling boil to get it done. This is about 190 right now, and this will be sufficient for sterilization. I'm going to let it get a little bit hotter though, just because you do need a rolling boil when you're actually processing your jam. So I'm going to help it get to that point right now instead of later. And then I wanted to show you, see, we're getting a little thicker here. You can see the bubbles look just a little bit different now. We're still not quite there. But at this point, you may notice while you're cooking that you might find like a little seed that just kind of got left out. They tend to float to the top, so you can just use your spoon to get them out if you notice one. That's a big one that I miss. But most of the time, it's just little tiny floater seeds. But yeah, so we're getting there, and then let's take a look at this jam thermometer here, or candy thermometer. Oh, that's fog. Well, It's really gone down. But basically, it's still sitting at just a little bit above 200. It's going to take a while for it to get down. All right. Also at this point, since my water's hot enough, I'm going to go ahead and scoop some of my water into a little frying pan here. And I just grab just a little easy plastic measuring cup and pour it on in there. Now again, you just want the lids to be all covered so that they can start softening up and getting to the point where they're going to create that seal. Okay, looks like I've got a bit of a floater right here. Not that, this guy. Okay, we're going to turn him around. I'm going to put that guy back in. All right, so see all the lids are submerged in the water. I've got the rings in as well, and the magnet's sticky, so that's going to work. All right, we'll check back in a second. Oh, but as you can see, I still have a little over an inch of water. You have to at least have an inch of water for processing, so don't take too much out. Okay, guys, we're getting closer. I just wanted to show you what it looks like at this stage. Yes, I do still have that little baggie in there. That's where my pectin's coming from. It stays in the whole time. You just scoop around it when you're ready. But you see how little water there is left? Like, you have to cook it down a lot. So, but you can tell that the bubbles are starting to get a little bit thicker, but we're still just trying to get rid of that water. And believe it or not, this thermometer still says that it's only 200 degrees. So, just goes to show how much you have to cook down jam in order to get it to the right consistency. You want as little water as possible. But you can also tell how the fruit looks a lot more cooked. It's a lot more smushy, but you don't want it to be complete smush, at least for marmalade. But this is a good cooked consistency now. So I will come back in when we're ready to do the plate test. So I put a little bit of jam on the plate to do the plate test, and you can see there's that little bit of dollop right there. Now all you have to do is take your finger and swipe it through. Okay, you see how it's going back? Did you see how it moved? Like, it didn't ripple, it didn't stay still, it's still too liquidy. That's not the consistency that we want. I knew that it wasn't ready. It was probably only at 205 degrees when I did this one, but I wanted to show you what you're not looking for versus what you actually want it to do. Okay, so we're getting to a part of jam making where it's at a dangerous but crucial point. No, it is not ready yet. I know it seems like, look, there's barely any water in it. And you think, yeah, it's ready, but it doesn't pass the test. And it's only at about 210 degrees right now. We need it to reach 220 to be jam consistency. I'm sorry, I said 225 earlier. It's 220. You need it to be that temperature, or if you don't have a thermometer, then use your plate test. I just did one. It's not ready yet. It looks like it's so close. As you can see, there's hardly any water. You need to make sure that you're by your pot, that you're stirring it, making sure it's not sticking to anything. You don't want to burn your jam at this point. This would be the point where you could burn it. We're getting to the point where there's a little bit of water left and a lot of sugar. And sugar left unattended, if you've ever tried to make caramel before, will burn. So be careful. We're almost there. Okay, second plate test. We're going to see how it's going. Run our finger through it. Almost. Did you see how I was running my finger through, how it rippled? We want that ripple to stay in there. It's very, very close. You know how I told you that the bubbles are going to get thicker? You see how it's moving all of the fruit in it? Like, it's so, so close. And look how little liquid. There's this little liquid in it, and it's still not ready, but it is almost there. Okay, I think this was the last plate test. Let's see. Alright, yeah, you see how it did that? It rippled and it stayed. It's very goopy. This is the jam consistency. And then when we turn and look at our pot, look at it's so thick. That's exactly what we want. It's a lot thicker because it's more of a marmalade too, but perfect consistency. We're going to stop this. All right, it's time to work fast. The jam's ready. Let's go. We're going to take the top off this and turn this off for a second. It is very hot. I'm going to pull my jars out, tilt the water out, put them on a cloth. Reason you put them on a cloth is so it doesn't come in contact with a too cold a surface and crack. I may have overestimated how many jars I need. We'll see. All right, got my jars out. Next thing, gonna grab my funnel here. And then I'm gonna grab this right here. This is my little cup that I use to scoop it up. Scoop it into your jam. Plop it on in. Again, earlier I talked about how you want to leave enough space, that head space, to make room for your jar. I'm sorry, for your lid. See how thick it is coming out? That's what you want. I think I'll have enough for 3 jars. Let me move that out of the way. Get that out of the way. Ooh. Again, just work around your little baggie. It's just got your seeds in it. Most jams and jellies are going to be a lot easier to do. This one's just really thick because of all the skin that's in it. Okay, so that's all my consistency. I'm going to throw these in here. Going to grab my magnet tool, which is right here, and grab for those lids very carefully. Now, I use the funnel. You can see that my surfaces are clean. If they're not clean, take a little paper towel. Dip it in your hot water. Be very careful. And then just go ahead and go around the top. If you think you see a little something, don't be afraid to prep, even if you think that you're crazy. See, I just did it just to make sure, even though I'm pretty certain that they were clean. Okay, grab your lid. Not the ring. Grab the lid. Turn it on. Ooh. Put it on just like that. Very gently. All right, now we need the rings. Okay, so we got our 3 rings right here. Now what we're going to do is very gently touch it. You should only be using the tips of your fingers to do this, and just use enough pressure with the tips of your fingers to get it to turn. If you put it on too tight, it's not going to be able to create the vacuum that you want. So just the tips. Someone even said if you're not certain about it, use your non-dominant hand to do it. Okay, so just barely got it on there. Now we're going to pick these bad boys up. Don't rock it. Put it straight down in. If you rock it from side to side, you're more likely to end up getting something on the seal area, and then it will not process. It won't create that seal, and you'll have to start all over. Okay, in the water, bump that on. You can put it on the highest heat that you want to. You need to wait until you have a rolling boil. This water is very hot. It won't take too long to get back up to that, but it has to be a rolling boil. And then, like I said, you leave that space I showed you earlier in between your cans. Leave your lid on. It's starting to work. Once you have a rolling boil, 10 minutes. Put a timer on for 10 minutes. That's all it takes to process. Some items will take longer. For jams, jellies, marmalades, just 10 minutes. And we'll check back then. All right, we're coming to my favorite part. Now, before we finish up, it's got just like, oh, It's got just a couple more minutes, not minutes, I'm sorry, just a couple more seconds. I did want to bring up one thing. I know I talked about botulism earlier in the video. I wouldn't worry about it when it comes to jams and jelly making. It's too acidic of an item for it to really grow. So if this is something that you're a little freaked out about it and you're making jam and jelly, don't worry. This is a good first item to do, I'd say, for that reason. But, get your practice in. We're going to turn this off. It's time for the best part. So, that's a hot pot. Be very careful. Grab your tongs, and we're going to pull directly up. Grab around the cap and just pull it straight up. I know that there might be some water on top. That's okay. Leave that there. I know you might be tempted to turn it to get it out, but since the jam in the jar is so hot right now, it kind of liquefies a little bit when it gets that hot, and it could cover your seal if you tilt it. So what I like to do is just pull them directly out, back up, and then just grab a little washcloth and soak up the extra water. Okay, you hear that? That ping? That's the best part. When you hear that ping, you know you did it right. It's creating the seal. Oh, it's the favorite part. Okay. So it looks like... Oh, that's 2. We just need 1 more. So exciting. Okay, looks like these 2 went. Did you go, mister? Another way you can tell is if you happen to not hear the ping, is you can see it best on this one right there. You see that little depression in there? I'm sure you've seen that on jars before. That's your little food safe depression. If you can push on that and it makes a little noise, then you don't have a seal. So I can push on this really hard and there's no noise. Same with this one over here. It's pressed down. Let's see if this one... Okay, so this one, I didn't hear the ping, but it's not popping up and down. So all of these jars have sealed appropriately like I want them to, which is great. That's what you want. Also, those pings are just so exciting. So we've got them on our cloth. They're finished. Leave them, let them sit there for at least half a day. Go for a whole day if you want. And then once they're completely cooled down, then you can take the rings off of them and store them away. Or if you like to keep the rings on, then you can do that too. If you give them away as gifts, I'd keep the rings on. They just look a little cuter. But yeah, so guys, we did it. We finished our Kumquat Marmalade. It looks beautiful. Now, what happens though if you don't hear that ping? Good news is you can try again. If you don't have your seal, then all you have to do is just take the lid off, make sure that everything's sterilized, wipe it down. It's mostly been, in my experience at least, because there was something on the lid on the top of the jar preventing the seal. And then once you get it all sterilized again, cleaned off, put it back in, stick it back in the water bath. Sit it for 10 minutes after it becomes a boil, take it back out again, and you should hear that ping. So it's fine if it doesn't happen the first time. You can fix your mistake. Second question, what happens if you didn't get the right jam consistency? That's okay. If your jam turns out a little bit more watery, then that's fine. It's still going to be delicious. It's still going to be food safe. Like, everything's okay. Maybe you're really off the mark and you just made syrup. Just call it something else. Call it syrup if you want to. So this is, I know it seems like it was complicated, but once you get it down, it's super easy and it's a great way to store, the season's harvest and have it all year round. And then again, if you haven't had homemade jam before, it tastes so much better than the store-bought stuff. So that's what we've got today. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me with this lesson, and I hope to see you for the next one.